At the end of the last module, I asked you to analyze a case involving a collision between a car driver, who was the defendant, and a motorcyclist, who was the plaintiff. And I asked you to analyze the documents in your possessions by imagining yourself as either the car driver or the motorcyclist. The documents you have been given are taken from a real court case. After reading about the case, I also ask you to answer a few questions about the number of arguments in favor of each party and the importance you gave to each of these arguments. I also ask you your best guess about the amount of the judge's award to John, the plaintiff in the case. And I also asked you what you considered to be a fair amount for John to receive in an out-of-court settlement. The procedure I used in this exercise replicates almost identically a study by George Lowenstein and his colleagues. This study aimed to show how biased we are in the analysis of a conflict when this conflict concerns us personally or someone that we represent. Now, let's look at the results obtained by Lowenstein and his colleagues and see if you can connect your response to what these researchers have found. Let's start with the number of arguments in the record that plead for either the defendant or the plaintiff. The numbers that appear here are scores representing the difference between the number of arguments for the plaintiff minus the number of arguments for the defendant. The more positive the numbers, the more evidence there is for the plaintiff in the case. If the numbers are negative, it means that the case contains more elements in favor of the defense. Now let's look at how these numbers differ between people who imagine themselves in the role of the plaintiff and those who imagine themselves in the role of the defendant. As you can see, the evaluation of the case seems to differ depending on whether we imagine ourselves as plaintiff or defendant. Plaintiffs perceive that there are more elements in their favor than defendants, and the reverse is true for defendants. When we take into consideration the importance of the arguments put forward, it is the same thing. The plaintiffs feel that the elements that plead in their favor are clearly more important, and it is the opposite that occurs for the defendants. These results clearly show that the analysis of a case is strongly biased by the side we take when we are reading the case. As a result, since we sincerely believe that the case contains more elements in our favor, the estimates of a fair payout also vary. Those of us in the plaintiff's shoes think that the plaintiff should receive $37,000, while those of us in the defendant's shoes think that the defense should only pay $19,000. Similarly, predictions about the judge's ultimate decision differ. The plaintiffs believe that the judge will award them $39,000, and the defendants believe that the award will be limited to $24,000. Knowing that in reality the judge's real decision was to award $30,000 to the plaintiff, it is clear that both sides were mistaken. Both tended to be overly optimistic about what the decision of the judge would be. It is the bias of excessive optimism that leads us to overestimate our chances of success in a trial and consequently to opt for dissolution at the expense of less aggressive conflict management methods. Finally, it should be noted that the excessive optimism bias affects both the parties in conflict and the lawyers. As experience has shown us, The simple fact of being on one side of the fence rather than on the other is enough to bias our analysis of the case, and professional lawyers are not immune to that problem.